live. Little test, little test. Alright, I got volume. Cool. Alright. Let me get this popped over and off to one side. Got that just in case somebody comes around and want to watch. Alright, minimize this. And okay, so this will be part 3 of, I don't know how long the parts are going to be, but I'm trying to do each one of these in small little bits. Basically, this is some things that the NHL series, which is under EA Sports' umbrella, these are some things that EA could bring from the NHL series as far as our franchise mode offerings, bring over to Madden in such a fashion that would improve Madden, especially from an engagement standpoint. I'm kind of focusing on this from an online franchise perspective, and I realize that the NHL series is an offline franchise mode, but I'm focusing on things that would help bring people onto the console in franchise and not just to play games. So today what we're going to talk about is roles. The second video in this series talked about potential, and you'll see a lot of tie-ins between potential and role in this discussion, but I wanted to separate the two just so that way we can kind of hit on each one's high notes and talk about how those particular things could basically build upon each other to add a layer of detail to the Madden franchise. So in my last video I talked a lot about potential, and so now I kind of want to focus more on role. And this particular player that I'm showing right now, Thomas Tatar, has been a popular one in the video series so far, but he is currently, his role, he views himself as a second line forward. Now, just to show, I've got the line segments pulled up right now, and I figure it's easier to show this way than it would be to show in another screen I could go to. But essentially, what he views himself to be no worse than on this second line with whatever players are there. So he views himself as a second line forward. And that kind of goes hand in hand with his potential of being a top 6 forward. So essentially, this player feels like on whatever team he plays for, he should be a second line player at worst, and he is a top 6 potential player. Now I'll look at some other players in this equation. I'll take a look-see, for example, at this David Camp guy, and just to kind of show you how role does differentiate from potential, especially with younger players. This guy's 25 years old, and he's a 78 overall. His potential is a top 9. Now, potential in this case would mean that he feels if he hits his overall mark of that top 9 floor, he should be in one of these top 3 lines here. As you can see, I've got him on the 4th line, and that's because his role is a 4th line forward. He's a younger player who's still developing and growing. So that allows for a little bit more of a storyline build as far as you're taking a young player and you're kind of grooming him for that particular potential that he has by basically getting him and growing him slowly along the lines. This kid here is a 4th line forward as far as his role is concerned. And if I play him in that role and he succeeds in that role, he will probably or could potentially see a growth in his potential based upon coaching, which I'll talk about in a future video. I'm not sure if it's going to be the next one or if it's going to be 2 videos down, but it'll be coming. But depending on his coach and the attributes of that coach, plus his role, plus his potential, could all basically equate to a growth and an improvement if he does well in his role. So this kid right now, just to kind of translate the stats for those of you that aren't terribly familiar with hockey, plus minus at -9 is not good. That means that this kid and his line mates, when they're playing even strength, no power play, no penalty kill, their line has allowed 9 more goals than they've scored. So that's not a good ratio. You want to be on the positive end of that. Think of it like kind of like turnovers and points off of turnovers in football. Think of it kind of like that. It's a rough analogy, but generally speaking, the more you turn the ball over, the more chance you have of getting scored on, and the worse your team is going to be. That's kind of what that plus-minus ratio in a real rough translational sense means in hockey. So this kid right now, from what I can tell, is not really succeeding in his role, which isn't good for me because that could mean a potential dip in potential. But if I'm playing him at the role he desires, more often than not, his potential will not drop as a result. Could it drop? Yes. But more often than not, if you're playing a player in the role they desire or better, even if they see failure, they shouldn't drop too much in potential. And I'll give you an example with Thomas Tatar. Back to Mr. Tatar here. He's listed as a second line forward, which means that currently he would like to be playing down here. Okay, I currently have him, as you can see, I have him on the first line, and I have him with some players that also view themselves as second line forwards. Now, the good thing about that is, if these players were to succeed in this role, they would probably see a potential bump because they're playing above their station where they feel like they should be playing, and they're succeeding in that station. Now, this guy right now is currently kind of not succeeding, but he's also not failing. So, really, he probably won't see any change whatsoever of his potential at the end of the season should all these numbers kind of hold serve for the rest of the year. You can play people outside of role and play them above their role, and if they succeed at that, their potential has a good chance of going up as a result, depending on coaching. And where I can tie this into Madden is essentially we always have those players that we draft like in the 3rd or 4th or 5th round that have those 1 or 2, what I used in a previous video game attributes. You know, those attributes that we desire, the speed, the agility, the acceleration, things like that. And we'll plug them in a starting role, even though by their overall, even their development, they're not really designed to be that way. In this game, because there's potential, you can only get so high based on your potential, and your role is dictated usually by your overall. So usually the lower your overall is, for example, I'll highlight Mr. Cody Eakin here. From a previous video, I knew he was a bottom 6 guy. He's a 77 overall, and he views himself as a 4th line forward. That's what line he's playing on. So even if he basically has a terrible year, he shouldn't change too much in overall. That's not to say he wouldn't change in overall, but the more likelihood of him staying at that overall or that potential is there versus him losing potential. And where I see this benefiting the most is not necessarily in player development on a week-to-week basis, which it still could basically factor in because you could equate this, for example, just on a position-by-position basis. And we'll use a general position like wide receiver that goes 6, 7, 8 deep maybe, even at wide receiver, because that kind of equates to this type of structured setup in NHL. So your guys that are first and second line forwards in this game would be the equivalent of your starting 2 wide receivers and maybe your slot wide receiver. That would be your starting 3. Okay, so that would be equivalent of like your top 6. And then your guys that are your number 4, 5, and 6 wide receivers, they would be the guys that would filter down in this top 9, maybe bottom 6 area. And that would be basically your depth chart for wide receiver. If you played a guy that was supposed to be a 3rd or 4th wide receiver, or say 4th or 5th wide receiver, and you play him at the number 3 spot and he succeeds, his potential could go up, potentially, based upon his success. It could go up to a point where he could play and be successful overall-wise at that number 3 slot role in wide receiver. And I'm using wide receiver just as a general ease of transference standpoint. It could be transferred across all positions. You could simply go starting quarterback, backup quarterback, 3rd string quarterback, things like that. You could easily just equate it to a position-by-position basis. But all those roles would play a factor in how you play guys during the season, and then you equate it to free agency, which is where the real kicker of the role system comes into play. Because as you go to free agency, now this is a game that's already in play, So the main crux of free agency is already passed at this point. But as you can see, there's some really good. I'll flip it and organize it by overall. And this is by all players, by the way. Just to simplify it for those of you that may not be actual NHL guys or follow NHL, I'm going to flip it and just show forwards. Because again, defenseman kind of throws some different roles that I don't really want to confuse people with. So I'm going to stick just to forwards just to kind of keep it simple. Now, this is an organization of forwards, and as you can see, there's some really good overalls out there, and some of them have their roles. Actually, all of them have their roles showing on the side right here. These guys that are at the top view themselves as second-line forwards. I'll go in and show you an example. Joe Thornton, 41 years old, so he's an older veteran guy. Second-line forward, he still feels like he can get it done. His potential is top 6, but you know at 41 years old, that potential is going to start to decline. And also, just to kind of really piggyback off of a previous video, you can decrease in potential during the season. It only happens with veterans, though. I will say that. It only happens with veterans, your older guys. It doesn't happen with regular players that are basically, say, 31 years or less. I'll be safe to say 30 years or less. You won't see a decrease in potential during the season. It will only be during the off season. But veterans can regress during the season, so you have to be careful with that. But this is a guy here, Joe Thornton. He's 41 years old. He still is got a good overall, 82 overall. He still views himself as a second-line center, but you can flip down here. This is a kid, 26 years old. He's just on the cusp of basically locking in his potential. He views himself as a third scoring line forward. Now, there are differences between third lines. You can be a third check line forward, which means you're more physical, or you can be more scoring-based more often. Think an offensive player versus a defensive player, scoring versus checking, respectively. But this guy feels he's a scoring line forward, but he's a third line guy. He's a third line guy. So that means if I sign him and put him on that second line, I'm playing him outside his station. So he might not have the best success there. But if he does, that top 6 potential could actually bump up, maybe depending on the coaching. Free agency is the main crux I want to point out with this, because this would be perfect in determining contract requests from AI players in Madden and tying it into a role they will play. So, for example, I will use a real easy one, quarterback. Okay? If a guy is at the overall point where he feels like he would be a starting quarterback in the league, say this guy here, just Kevin Fiala, say we're equating this to Madden, he's a 83 overall, he feels like he's a starting quarterback, he's coming off his rookie deal. Because he wants to be a starting quarterback, he wants to be paid like a starting quarterback. So your AI would go look at everybody that's a starting quarterback, gather all that number information, and then pop a request right here is like, these are the years I want, this is the money I want, based upon my role. Okay? So you can see this guy here, he's 24 years old, he's a second line forward. He doesn't want a lot of money, actually, comparatively speaking. The older players get, the more money they ask for, which kind of makes sense if you think about it in a real life scenario. The older players get, the more money they try to get per year, because they're running out of playable years left. They want to get that money while they can, and it makes sense. So this guy's actually not asking for a whole lot of money right now, but he's also wanting to play on that second line. So if I wanted to sign him, and I played him on, say, the third line, or even the fourth line, I could potentially damage his overall, or damage his potential in such a fashion that he would drop an overall, because basically he would start to view himself as, I'm no better than a third line guy, so I'm going to drop in potential to meet that new expectation. And that's where it kind of plays along, the role and potential kind of tie together to basically make a player be able to get better or worse as you go along. But especially with Madden's free agency, as bad as the system is, having a role system in place like this would be a huge thing from a standpoint of basically having contracts meet up, and also being able for the player as an AI entity to see what your team has and being able to judge, I would not be in the role you are saying that I want to be on your team. So say Kevin Fiala was a second line forward. He wants to be a second line forward in the NHL. We're going back to NHL real quick. He's a second line forward. I sign him and I basically plug him in on that third line. Or he looks at my roster and sees I've got a bunch of second line forwards. He's obviously not going to play second line forward unless he thinks he can play first line forward in my team. He may not even sign, because at that point he'll look and go, you've got too many guys that are in the same role that I'm in, and because of that I don't know if I can get a job on this team, so I'd rather wait for a spot that fits my style or my role much better. And that's something that Madden could hugely benefit from, is having the ability for players to just tell you no, and it not just strictly be about money or filling a bar with the number of points. The point system that Madden uses right now is, how do I put this? It's awful. I can't put it nicely. It's awful. Okay? It's awful, and everybody knows what it is. In this particular mode of free agency, for example, this guy has one interested team in him. What I could do is I could actually go in, I can go offer a contract, and I can see it's Arizona, A-R-I, Arizona, okay? So I can go in and say, you know what? I'll offer you the same deal. I'll offer you 2.7 for 1 year. I don't know what Arizona's offered him. I don't. It doesn't tell. The only thing I know is that Arizona's offered him a contract. The fact that I don't know what's going on other than what team it is good in and of itself, because now I have to make a choice. Do I spend more money to get this player? Do I keep the contract the same and hope that he signs with me over Arizona, not knowing what Arizona's paid him? Or do I really just kind of crank up the contract level, and then from there we figure out if he actually wants to sign with me or sign with Arizona? Okay, and that doesn't preclude a third team from getting in the mix or a fourth team from getting in the mix. So that in and of itself, just with free agency and having roles tied to that, because this guy is a second line, he's a second line forward. If I tried to sign him, he may say no to me, not because of money. He may sign with Arizona because Arizona's actually got a spot for a second line forward that's open for him, versus my team not having that opening and him having to fight for a spot. Between competition or no competition, he might rather have the easier spot. Or he might be like, look, this is an up-and-coming team. It's a hungry team. I feel a leadership role. I'll jump in there. So role is really important in this game as far as determining. It's not the single determining factor, but it's an important one in determining, not only for your sake of determining where this player would fit based on what you currently have on the roster or what their overall is, but also from a standpoint of a general idea of, if I go to sign this player, I'm going to have to spend X amount of dollars or more to sign this player, mainly because, well, they want that importancy. They want that starter role. They want that elite level role. They want that backup role. I'll probably spend less for backups. As you go down this list, I'll organize it back by money again. You can see as I go down this list, the money goes down. As the money goes down, the roles tend to, for the most part, adjust down accordingly. Okay? You'll see sometimes like younger guys will take lesser role spots because they want to just prove themselves. Whereas older veterans, like Mr. Joe Thornton here, might try to hang on to a role they really don't belong in to try and basically go for one last shot at glory, essentially. And it makes sense from a veteran versus rookie perspective. Rookies are hungry. They want to prove themselves, especially if they didn't get drafted. Whereas a veteran has, previous background experience. Hey, look, you can look at my resume. This is what I've done over the years. You can see what I've done. This is why you should put me on this second line. So you have a choice, and you have some variety there. And I think it would really help from a free agency standpoint, especially with NHL's system of basically not knowing. The only thing I know from this screen is that there's one team interested, and there could be multiple teams interested. So the only thing I know from this screen is Arizona's interested, and he's a second line forward. Do I pay him more money and try and get him on my team? Do I increase the years, which can also affect how he joins the team? Not want to go too much detail on free agency. I'll probably do that in a separate video, just to kind of show how the system works, because there's a lot of other mechanics at play. But just know that role does play a pretty good part in determining whether or not a player chooses to sign with your team. And I think that would really benefit Madden from the standpoint of allowing players to decide, hey, look, this is something I want. If you can't give it to me, I'll go sign with somebody who will give it to me, because I'd rather do that than take the extra money. Will money overweigh a lot of factors? Most of the time, yeah. But this role system setup would definitely help to differentiate and kind of split up those players, so that way you kind of have to have an argument of, well, this guy's a better overall, could he maybe play on the first line? Or this guy's a better overall, could he maybe be the starting quarterback versus the backup quarterback? This guy is a worse overall, should I put him at backup or should I try and push him to starter and hope he grows into it? Things like that allow you to basically kind of look at your team from a different standpoint, give you a little different spin on it, and can kind of get you in an engagement level as far as looking at the team and going, you know what, I really need to go after this guy because I think not only does he fill a need, but I think he can excel in that need, and I think we can go get him depending on our cap situation. Let's go get him. And I think that role, along with potential and a lot of other things, role's more of a smaller thing comparatively speaking to potential. Most guys are going to look at the potential first, which that makes sense. But at the same time, this role is something that shouldn't be ignored, because if you play someone above or below their station too much and they fail at it, they will start to lose confidence and they will start to lose overall as a result. So you got to kind of manage their expectations a little bit and manage your own as well, which does create some engagement, because now you got to play with depth charts, you got to play with lineups. You may even have to trade a guy because you may have too many at one spot, and somebody's going to be left out in the cold. So why not get something for that player while they're still good? So again, a lot of tie-ins with role as far as keeping folks in a Madden CFM engaged in their entire 53-man roster, keeping a look at it, and maybe making some bargain basement decisions as far as moving guys, signing guys, things of that nature. I hope you enjoyed this video that kind of detailed roles a little bit better. I'm not sure what the next video is going to be about, but whenever I get it out here, I'll let you know. If you have any questions, comments about this or anything else I've done in this particular little mini series, leave a comment below. Just let me know if I missed